There are men who build their reputation on what they've actually done, and there are men who've spent a lifetime renting somebody else's reputation and calling it their own. I spent 22 years learning the difference between those two kinds of men. Took me longer than it should have, but I got there. My name is Edmund Holt, 69 years old, retired civil engineer, widower going on 8 years now. I spent 34 years designing bridges and drainage systems for the state of Indiana, the kind of work that doesn't get plaques on walls, but the kind where if you did it wrong, somebody's basement flooded or somebody's overpass cracked down the middle. I took that seriously. I still do. For 22 years, I watched a man named Malcolm Forsythe take up space at every family gathering the way a bad smell takes up a room. Unavoidable, overwhelming, and somehow always someone else's problem to address first. Malcolm was Duncan's father. Duncan married my daughter Suzanne 17 years ago when she was 26, and working as a hospital administrator in Indianapolis. Malcolm came from a family that had made money in commercial real estate development around the greater Cincinnati area sometime in the 1980s, and he had never once, not in 22 years, stopped reminding the rest of us about it. He had a way of asking questions that weren't really questions. He'd look across a restaurant table with that practiced easy smile and say something like, "Edmund, civil engineering, state work, right? Good pension on that, I imagine." The emphasis always landing on state work, like public service was the thing you chose when private industry didn't choose you. His wife Rosalind was kinder about it, the way distance is kinder than the source of the noise. You still heard it, just not as sharp. My late wife Constance used to say, on the drive home from every one of those Forsythe dinners, "Ed, that man's got more polish than he does substance." She'd say it quietly, like she was reading a diagnosis off a chart. She was almost always right about people. I miss that about her more than most things. I never pushed back on Malcolm in all those years. Not because I didn't see it. I saw it clearly. I stayed quiet because Suzanne had built her life beside Duncan, and Duncan, whatever his faults, and he had some, genuinely loved her. The last thing a father should do is make his daughter feel like she has to choose between the family she was born into and the family she married into. That's a wound that doesn't close right. So I passed the roles. I changed the subject. I drove home and talked to Constance's photograph on the mantel. I want you to understand one thing before I go any further. My silence was never emptiness. There's a difference. Cora was born the year after Suzanne and Duncan's wedding. My granddaughter. The one person in that whole arrangement who never needed to choose sides because she didn't know there were any. She was sharp from the day she could talk, the kind of child who asked the second question before adults had finished answering the first. She got that from Constance. Starting when Cora was 13, I began filling in the gaps, not because anyone asked me to, because I saw them. The private high school in their district, a good one, the kind with dual enrollment college courses and a real debate team, carried a tuition that Duncan and Suzanne were stretching their salaries to cover. Suzanne mentioned it the way she always mentioned money problems, sideways, like she was talking about traffic or the weather. "The school fees this year are just a lot, Dad. It's fine, we'll manage." I called my financial advisor, a man named Stuart Gaines, 58 years old and 26 years in the business, the following Monday. Over 4 years, I put $46,000 into a dedicated account Stuart helped me structure. Tuition supplementation, prep courses, the college counselor Cora needed when the school's own counselor was juggling 400 kids and a waiting list. I drove 2 hours round trip to every parent-teacher conference Suzanne couldn't make because of hospital scheduling. I took Cora to the public library every other Saturday for 3 years to work through AP chemistry problems because her teacher relocated mid-semester and the substitute didn't know the material. Malcolm told anyone who would listen that Cora's academic success was in the Forsythe blood. He said it at dinners. He said it at the country club. He said it often enough that I think he'd started to believe it himself. Cora got into the University of Michigan in late March. Full merit scholarship for the first 2 years, with a renewable gap that Suzanne and Duncan would need to cover starting junior year. She called me before she called anyone else, and when I picked up she was crying the good kind. The kind where you can't get the words out fast enough. "Grandpa, I got into Michigan." I sat down at Constance's kitchen table and held the phone, and I told my granddaughter I was proud of her in a way that was completely true and entirely insufficient at the same time. That was on a Thursday. The following Tuesday, Suzanne sent me a text. I was in the garage, sorting through a box of Constance's gardening tools I'd been meaning to organize for 2 years, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. I figured it was Suzanne's confirming what time I should arrive for the celebration dinner they were planning for Cora that Saturday. It wasn't a confirmation. Dad, about Saturday. Malcolm is hosting the dinner at his club this time. He wants it to be just the Forsythe side. He's already made the reservation. I hope you understand. We'll celebrate with you separately, I promise. I read it once. I read it again. Then I set the phone face down on the workbench and went back to organizing Constance's hand trowels. I won't tell you it didn't land hard. It landed the way things land when they confirm something you've been too careful to fully acknowledge. My granddaughter, the girl I'd sat beside at library tables on 40-some Saturday mornings, whose scholarship essays I'd read 13 drafts of, who had called me first on a Thursday in March, was going to celebrate the biggest achievement of her young life at Malcolm Forsythe's country club, and I was being asked to wait for separately. I set the trowel down, picked up my phone, typed 5 words, understood, enjoy the evening. Then I called Stuart. Stuart, I said, the $9,500 I had you earmarked for Cora's orientation expenses and the book credit account, hold it, don't move it anywhere. A pause. Everything okay, Ed? Not entirely, I said, but it will be. He didn't ask more than that. He's been handling my accounts long enough to understand when a question is an intrusion. I hung up, went inside, made coffee, and sat at Constance's table for a long time. Suzanne called at 7:40 the next morning. I was on my second cup. Dad. That particular tightness in her voice, the one she used when she'd already decided I'd done something wrong before hearing my side. Stuart's office called Duncan. They said the orientation account was frozen. What's going on? Good morning, sweetheart. Dad, please. We have logistics to sort out. The book credit was supposed to transfer this week. I know when it was due, I said. I set it up. So, what happened? I made an adjustment, given the situation. What situation? The one where your father isn't welcome at his granddaughter's celebration dinner, I said. That situation. Silence on the line, not the brief kind, the kind where you can hear somebody recalibrating. Dad, that was. Malcolm already had the reservation, and it's his club, and I didn't want to make it into a hole. I'm not asking you to make it into anything, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm telling you that when I'm not welcome at Cora's table, my checkbook isn't welcome there either. That's not a threat. It's just a consistent set of facts. She didn't answer right away. Separately, I said. You used that word, like I'm an appointment that got rescheduled. I let that sit. I've been covering that child's education for 4 years, Suzanne. I didn't ask for a seat at the head of the table. I just asked for a seat. I heard her exhale. I'll call you later, Dad, she said. The tightness was gone. What replaced it was harder to name, something between shame and the beginning of a reckoning. She hung up. I poured out the last of my coffee and went back to the garage. I wasn't at Saturday's dinner, so I can only tell you what I pieced together from 2 phone calls and what Duncan told me later. What I know is this. Malcolm Forsythe stood up at that country club in his pressed jacket and his permanent smile and told the assembled family about the education trust he'd been setting aside for Cora, the one he'd mentioned at every Thanksgiving for 6 years running, the one that was going to cover whatever Michigan didn't. He said it the way a man announces a gift he's already purchased, already wrapped, already set under the tree. 2 days later, Duncan called Malcolm to get the details so they could coordinate with Michigan's financial aid office. Malcolm said he'd have the paperwork over by end of week. End of week came and went. Then a text about his accountant being backed up. Then 2 calls that went straight to voicemail on a Tuesday. Duncan is the kind of man who, once he notices something doesn't add up, cannot stop counting. Suzanne had always said it was what she'd loved about him. Malcolm had always considered it a flaw. Duncan pulled the property records first. The Forsythe house in Indian Hill, the one with the circular driveway and the bronze landscape lighting Malcolm had mentioned installing 3 summers ago, had been refinanced in 2019 and again in 2022. The equity position was not what a man who regularly invoked his family's real estate portfolio would suggest. He called a former colleague who worked adjacent to the Cincinnati commercial real estate market. The colleague was quiet before saying, carefully, that Forsythe Development had been restructuring for about 4 years, and that the word on that side of town wasn't encouraging. The country club membership was still current, but only because Rosalind had taken a part-time position at a local school district. something she'd mentioned to nobody in the family. The trust Malcolm had announced at dinner did not exist. There was no paperwork because there had never been a trust. Only an intention, the kind that lives comfortably in the space between what you want people to believe about you and what you've actually done. Duncan called me on a Wednesday night, late, not his usual hour. Ed, he'd started calling me Ed about 3 years ago, I'd noticed. I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. How much have you actually put into Cora's education, total? I told him. The tuition supplements, the test prep, the college counselor, the Saturday mornings, the $9,500 sitting frozen in Stuart's account. He was quiet for so long I checked the call was still connected. My father told me, he said finally, that if it weren't for his guidance and his family's resources, we'd have struggled a lot more. I know what he told you, Duncan. Ed. His voice cracked on my name slightly. Why didn't you say anything, any of it? Because it wasn't mine to say, I told him. A man doesn't undercut his son-in-law's father just to prove a point, even when the point needs proving. That's not how I was raised. Another long silence. What do I do now? He asked. That question, simple, honest, with no performance behind it, was the most direct I'd heard Duncan sound in 17 years. Nothing tonight, I said. Get some rest. We'll sort the rest out. Cora showed up at my door on a Thursday afternoon, not Suzanne, not Duncan, Cora. She was still in the hoodie she'd clearly slept in, hair pulled back, a manila folder tucked under one arm. She'd driven herself. She'd had her license 8 months and still drove like she was taking the test. Grandpa, she said, standing on my porch, I talked to Mr. Gaines's office. I stepped back from the door. Come inside, Cora. She came in without needing a second invitation. I got her a glass of water and sat across from her at Constance's table, and she set the folder down between us. It was full of printouts she'd assembled herself. The bank letter when I'd set up the tuition account, a copy of the college counselor invoice with my name on it, the receipt for the AP chemistry workbooks I'd ordered in bulk from a used textbook website because they were $8 each instead of $45. She'd found all of it. She looked up at me with her grandmother's eyes, steady, taking the measure of things. They told me at the dinner that Grandpa Forsythe was the one making sure I had everything I needed, she said. Not accusing, just stating. I know what they told you. This isn't what they told me. She tapped the folder. No, I agreed, it isn't. She was quiet a moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car went past outside. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. I looked at my granddaughter, this girl I'd driven to debate tournaments, whose scholarship essays I'd read 13 drafts of, who had called me first on that Thursday in March, and I told her the truth. Because the point wasn't for you to know what I did, I said. The point was for you to have what you needed. Her jaw tightened. I watched her work to keep her composure in the way people work when they've decided this is not the moment for tears. Are you going to release the money? She asked, the $9,500. It's already been moved, I said. She looked up. Not to an orientation account, I said. To a 529 in your name, Cora. Just your name. No conditions, no strings, nothing anyone else can announce at a dinner table. I folded my hands. The orientation expenses I'll cover out of my regular account. The 529 is for your junior and senior year, when the merit scholarship runs out and you'll need the gap covered. It's already funded enough to handle it. She stared at me. Your grandmother used to say that the best thing you can give someone isn't money, I said. It's the ability to make choices without owing anybody the outcome. I paused. I couldn't give you everything she gave me, but I can give you that. Cora reached across Constance's table and put her hand over mine, and for a moment neither of us said a word, and I was glad for it. Some moments are better left without language filling them up. Suzanne came 2 days later. No text announcing it, just a knock at the front door on a Saturday morning, her car in my driveway with the engine still ticking cool. She looked like she hadn't slept well. She looked, I realized, the way she had in her 20s, before 17 years of Forsythe family dinners had taught her a particular kind of careful. Younger, the way people sometimes look when something they've been carrying a long time finally gets set down. I opened the door wider. She came in. I poured coffee. We sat at the table. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at its surface for a long moment before she looked at me. Dad, she said, I owe you more than an apology, but I'm going to start there because I don't know another way in. She took a breath. I let Malcolm define what a provider looked like for a long time, what success looked like, And I let that make me treat you like you were less than what you actually were, less than what you were doing right in front of me, for years. Her voice didn't waver. She'd decided to get through this without wavering. I'm sorry, not just for the dinner, for the whole pattern, all of it. I let that sit in the air between us. Constance used to say the strongest apology is the one with no exit ramp built into it, I told her. Suzanne nodded once. I'm not looking for one. I know, I said. That's why I'm telling you. I covered her hand with mine. Come for dinner Sunday. Bring Duncan and Cora. We'll do a proper meal. She breathed out, long and slow, like a door easing open after years of sticking shut. Yeah, she said quietly, I'd like that. Malcolm called me once. A Tuesday evening in May. I was on the back porch watching the light change. The Bradford pear Constance had planted the spring before she got sick in full bloom the way it was every year, and still managed to catch me off guard every time. Unknown number, Cincinnati area code I picked up. Edmund. His voice was different without a dining room behind it. Smaller, the way certain buildings look impressive from the street until you walk inside and realize the ceiling is lower than you expected. Malcolm. I think we should talk, he said, man to man. Man to man after 22 years of dinners. We're talking right now, I said. A pause, he'd expected more runway. There were some complications on my end, he said. The trust, I announced. I want you to know I had every intention. Malcolm, I said, setting down my coffee, I'm going to stop you there. He stopped. I don't need an explanation, I said, and I'm not angry with you. I want that to be clear, I'm not angry. I watched a robin land in Constance's pear tree and tilt its head at something in the branches. I'm just finished pretending I don't see what's in front of me. Finished sitting at tables where I'm the help as long as my checkbook is useful and a name on a guest list the moment it isn't. I paused. Cora is covered. Her education is taken care of. You don't need to worry about the gap. Silence on the line. That was supposed to be mine to do, he said, smaller still. I'd told everyone I was going to. I know what you told everyone, I said, not unkindly. Telling is the easy part. The Saturday mornings are harder. He didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer for it. Take care of Rosalind, I said. Focus on your own house. That's all I've got. I hung up and watched the robin lift off into the late afternoon, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for longer than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. Cora's graduation party happened in my backyard on a Saturday in June. My yard on Millbrook Lane, not a club, not a rented banquet hall. Just the old wooden deck Constance and I had built together the summer after Suzanne finished high school, strung with the same lights I'd used for every birthday since Cora was 3. Duncan came early to help with the folding tables. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There's a particular quiet between two men who've been on the wrong footing for a long time and have both finally decided to stand differently. It doesn't need to be named. It just needs to be maintained. Suzanne brought potato salad from the recipe Constance had written on an index card that I still kept in the kitchen drawer. She set it out without being asked, and when she caught my eye from across the deck, she gave me a small nod. I nodded back. Cora arrived with 2 friends from school, loud and easy and ready to argue about the best spots on the Michigan campus in a way that made me smile, because she'd been making arguments like that since she was 9. When she came through the back gate and saw the lights and her parents standing together, without the managed distance that had existed between them for years, she crossed the yard and hugged me the way you hug someone you were scared of losing. Thanks for not disappearing on us, Grandpa, she said into my shoulder. Was never an option, I told her. Now go on, you're going to make me sentimental in front of company. She laughed, full and easy and without reservation, and ran off to find her friends. I stood at the grill in an old flannel shirt I'd had since before Constance passed, and I cooked and I listened to the sound of my family in my own backyard. I thought about something I'd read years ago in an engineering reference manual, of all places. A line about load-bearing structures versus decorative ones. The book said they can look identical from the outside. You only find out which is which when the weight gets applied. Malcolm Forsythe had spent 22 years looking like a load-bearing wall. I'd spent 22 years being one. As the evening quieted and the guests drifted toward their cars, Duncan came and stood beside me at the grill. He watched the coals a moment before he looked at me. Ed, he said, I've been trying to figure out the right thing to say to you for 6 weeks. You don't have to say anything. I know I don't, he said. That's not why I'm saying it. A pause. You held this family up for a long time without making anyone feel the weight of it. I didn't see it because I wasn't looking. I'm looking now." He reached out, and for the first time in 17 years, Duncan shook my hand and held it a moment longer than a handshake requires. "I'm sorry I wasn't looking sooner. I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't entirely. I didn't say it didn't matter, because it had. I said, I'm glad you're looking now." He nodded. We let it stand at that. Later, when the guests were gone and the lights still hung in Constance's pear tree, and Cora had fallen asleep in a lounge chair with her phone on her chest, I sat at the picnic table we had refinished together 3 times over 30 years and thought about what this long year had actually been about. It wasn't about a dinner I wasn't invited to. It wasn't about $9,500 or a 529 plan or the foreclosure notice that had arrived at Malcolm's house sometime in May. I'd heard about it through Stuart, not through the family. It wasn't even about being right, though I was. It was about the moment when a man finally stops confusing endurance with acceptance. When he stops calling the weight of being overlooked a kind of virtue and starts calling it what it actually is. A line that got crossed one too many times. I'd spent 22 years building things in the background while Malcolm Forsythe stood at the front and accepted the credit. I'd built a girl who got into Michigan on merit. I'd built 40-some Saturday mornings that nobody saw and nobody thanked me for. I'd built a 529 plan that would carry my granddaughter through her junior and senior year without her owing a single favor to anyone for it. Malcolm had built an image, a membership on borrowed time, an announcement at a dinner table about a trust fund that didn't exist. One of those things held weight. My name is Edmund Holt, 69 years old, retired civil engineer, widower, grandfather. I spent 34 years building structures that had to perform in the real world, and I spent 22 years watching a man mistake the appearance of strength for the substance of it. The difference, I've learned, is not loud. It doesn't announce itself at country clubs. It shows up on a Thursday afternoon when a girl in a wrinkled hoodie drives herself to your house with a manila folder full of receipts, because she needed to know who had actually been there. She knew. That was enough. That has always been enough.